In his morning meal, our sculptor has received a commission to create a sculptural group. He has been asked to interpret in bronze this theme: the key to progress is man's confidence in his fellow man. He has been requested to submit sketches. Progress through man's confidence in his fellow man. What better than the early pioneer and the modern industrial worker clasping hands over the fruits of their combined efforts? On paper, the inspirational idea seems excellent, but it must be tested in the sculptor's essential medium, clay. Hastily, he completes a sketch or plan in clay built upon a skeleton or armature of wire. In this first plan, little attention is given to detail, yet the costumes must be authentic and suited to the medium. The coonskin cap of the early hunter is temporarily exchanged for a hat of broad brim, but this seems to create a bad balance, and so the cap is replaced. From time to time, the sculptor compares his clay group with his original pencil sketch to see that his composition is progressing satisfactorily. He adds finishing touches to the costumes and finally the faces, although again fine detail is not sought after, but rather a broad treatment of the group. Only the general composition will be considered when this sketch is submitted to the client. When he is satisfied with the broadly executed clay group, the sculptor surveys his completed sketch or plan for interpreting the theme progress through mutual confidence. Once approval is secured, armatures are built for a new clay group. The sculptor's detailed and serious effort. Each armature or skeleton is made of pliable lead wire, separate pieces for each side, a third for torso and head. A rigidly jointed pipe supports the lead wire. This is now wrapped with cord or wire, and two supports called butterflies are also added to keep the clay from sagging or slipping. To avoid corrosion, the sculptor covers the entire skeleton with an impervious shellac. A most important step here is the use of a nude model. This building of the correct natural form is always the basis upon which the success of the ultimate work depends. Referring constantly to his nude model, the sculptor carefully builds the rough figure upon the lead wire skeleton. Long practice enables him to do this with assurance. As a guide to accuracy in further modeling, he traces the curve of the body and the relative angles of the chest, the hips, and the knees. Many years of anatomical study, including dissection, enable the sculptor to place the larger muscles, such as here in the back, and the large muscle at the side of the neck, with bold confidence. Thus, he builds the figure outward from its skeletal structure. Last of all, the musket of the pioneer, merely a wooden stick, later to be covered with a thin layer of clay. The sculptor, now sure that his representation of the figure is correct, works from this point on with his model draped in the approved costume. The costume must be accurate for the period, but arrangement of folds may conform to rules of good composition. The dimensions, forms, and textures apparent on the model are only suggestions for the sculptor's interpretation in clay. As is customary, the head of the pioneer here is being idealized. Even in the delicate task of shaping the features, the sculptor uses simple tools, depending chiefly upon his hands and his skill in handling clay. At this stage, his knowledge of anatomy makes the facets of the face sufficiently familiar to him so that he works confidently on eyes, nose, mouth, and chin. With equal sureness, he carves out the folds of the hunter's leather jacket using a simple wire tool. With a small stick, he makes the detail in the shoulder fringe. Reference to the model shows him the approximate position of the powder horn, but he changes this placement on the clay figure to a higher, more zestful angle. At various times, the developing work is examined at long range. Here, for example, to make sure the weight of the body is resting strongly upon the left or standing leg. When both figures are essentially complete, deft touches similar to the grace notes in music are imparted. The pinnacle of the sculptor's creative effort is reached when the clay figures are brought together. The early pioneer and the modern industrial worker done in complete and accurate detail. And finally, the symbolic tools and fruits of progress are put in place beneath the clasped hands, symbols of cooperative effort. From the fragile clay model, a plaster cast is made, and a large-sized clay group will be scaled up accurately from this cast. Hundreds of points on the plaster are checked in building up each large figure. With his compass calipers, the sculptor checks each point from 3 reference points, known as the 3-point system. Each measurement, checked by the small end of the calipers, is automatically enlarged accurately at the other end of the calibrated instrument. A matchstick or toothpick is inserted here, and the clay will be built out to its end. Thus, every dimension of the plaster cast of the industrial worker is scaled up accurately, and by the same technique, an accurate enlargement of the early pioneer is made possible. When the large clay group has been completed roughly, the models are called back into the studio and are used as a final check upon each fine detail in the larger work. Here the sculptor examines at close range every line and contour of the hand clasping the gun. Every detail of costume and the general pose are treated with an eye toward their effect in the ultimate bronze. This wire tool, wrapped about with finer wire, is used to help simulate the texture of the skin. Now a flat boxwood stick, supplemented by the ever-useful thumb and forefinger. Even here, the tools used aside from thumb and forefinger are extremely simple. These minute details, which will enrich the bronze work, occupy months of the sculptor's painstaking creative effort. Again, the forefinger and the deft thumb cause a prominent vein to assume its proper roundness. The skin texture being achieved, the sculptor turns his attention to another problem, that of the heavy, coarse apron of leather characteristic of the shop worker. How skillfully the uneven, coarse appearance of leather develops. A slightly different texture obtains in the deerskin jacket of the pioneer. Here, as throughout the entire finishing process, the sculptor checks his points of reference with those of the plaster model and builds out the fold of the jacket exactly to the ends of these points. In the bronze, this part will be in shadow, and so with another simple tool he breaks the smoothness of the surface in this shadow. Corrosion in the bronze will impart a greenish hue to this part and consequently create a luminous shadow. Now, the uneven leather texture of the coat is brought out by lumps of clay smoothed down slightly. Painstakingly, our sculptor works out the necessary detail in the sheaf of wheat, in the covered wagon wheel, the plowshare, and other elements of the symbolic central group. This attention continues as he further refines the head of the industrial worker. Details of hair and headdress, each must fit perfectly into the larger aspects of the work. Finally, the face, with every part brought to its culmination, is given its last touch of texture. The creative effort of the sculptor is at an end. The theme is completed. Here, in monumental clay, is his expression of man's progress through confidence in his fellow man. The industrial worker fairly speaks of power driving toward achievement. The alert attitude of the pioneer promises conquest of hostile wilderness. As the two regard each other with mutual confidence, the strength of the worker who carries on is fulfillment of the pioneer's early dream of progress. The firmly clasped hands express the mutual confidence needed to harvest the fruits of toil through the years of a country's growth. The fragile clay, next cast in substantial plaster, is finally recast during bronze, the sculptor's means of perpetuating the triumph of his creative genius.